It was just after midnight when a drenched stranger stepped into the Harborview Hotel. He didn't ask for a room. He requested one. Room 6. The night clerk handed over the key, but something about the man's pale smile made his stomach knot. When he checked the ledger, his blood ran cold. Room 6 hadn't been booked in 30 years. The last entry was in the same handwriting, and the guest never checked out. By dawn, the new guest was gone, and so was the clerk. The only thing left was the key and a wet trail to nowhere. Part 1. The man at the door. The Harborview Hotel hadn't had a full lobby in over 20 years. Perched on the edge of a weather-beaten cliff in a town most maps didn't bother naming anymore, the old place mostly served as a stopover for traveling salesmen, the occasional lost tourist, and people who didn't want their names on credit card receipts. Evan knew this because he was the night clerk. It was supposed to be the easiest job in the world, a few check-ins, a pot of lukewarm coffee, and a good paperback to pass the hours until dawn. But on this night, the rain wasn't just falling. It was hammering the roof in sheets, the wind slamming into the side of the building hard enough to make the glass in the lobby rattle. The old brass desk bell sat in front of him, silent, reflecting the jaundiced light from the flickering ceiling fixture. He was just pouring himself another cup of coffee when the lobby door opened. Not creaked, not squeaked. Opened. The man who stepped inside didn't look like he'd run in from the rain. More like the rain had been trying to push him back out. His coat dripped steadily onto the faded carpet, leaving a growing black stain around his boots. He didn't rush toward the desk, didn't even look around to take in the place. He walked straight to Evan with the slow certainty of someone who already knew exactly where everything was. "I'll take room 6, he said. "No, hello. No, do you have any vacancies?" "Just that." Evan blinked. Sure. Just need a name for the book." The man hesitated, then said it. Evan wrote it down, not recognizing it, but noticing the oddly old-fashioned penmanship the man had, all looping letters and heavy downward strokes. When Evan asked for ID, the man's lips twitched in something between a smirk and a warning. "Cash," he said, and slid 2 worn bills across the counter. They were perfectly dry, though his coat was still dripping. Evan cleared his throat. "Sure, cash is fine." The man kept his gaze locked on him as he retrieved the tarnished brass key from the wall rack. Room 6 was at the far end of the second floor, a corner room with a view of the cliff. As Evan handed it over, their fingers brushed for just a second, and he swore the man's skin was cold. Not the kind of cold you get from being out in the rain, colder. "You'll find the room comfortable," the man said, though his voice was flat, like the words were a formality. He turned and began walking toward the stairs, boots leaving small wet prints that faded almost instantly into the worn carpet. Evan exhaled, only realizing then how tense his shoulders had been. He picked up the check-in ledger to add the rest of the details, and froze. Room 6 had only been booked once in the last 3 decades. The name in the ledger was different, but the handwriting was the same. The date, November 14th, 1995. The checkout column was blank. A cold gust rattled the lobby windows, though the door was closed. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, slowly, as if someone had just stepped into a room that hadn't been opened in 30 years. Part 2. Room 6 is awake. The rest of the night should have been uneventful. That was the rule at Harborview. If you made it past midnight without trouble, you could coast into sunrise. But Evan couldn't shake the unease. It started with the scratching. At first, he thought it was the rain running through the gutters, but this was different, faint, deliberate, coming from directly above the front desk. Room 6 was right over that spot. The hotel's ancient security system was barely worth the term. A grainy black and white camera feed that switched between the 4 hallway angles every few seconds. But Evan found himself staring at the tiny screen anyway, waiting for it to cycle to the second-floor corner hall. When it finally did, static. It wasn't the usual flicker. It was a heavy distortion, like the camera was underwater, the shapes behind it shifting but never coming into focus. He frowned, switching to the live feed from the other hallways. Perfectly clear. Only room SIX's corridor looked like it had been pulled from a dream someone was trying to forget. Footsteps pulled him from the screen. Marisol, the morning housekeeper, had come in early to escape the storm. She was short, brisk, and unflappable, a woman who'd seen enough odd guests to have a sixth sense for trouble. She stopped at the desk, eyes flicking toward the second-floor stairs. You get someone up there last night. Evan nodded slowly. Room 6. Marisol's lips tightened. That room's got the nailed window. He raised an eyebrow. Nailed? Management sealed it shut years ago. But, she hesitated, glancing toward the hallway again. The curtains are moving. Before Evan could respond, she was gone, heading for her cleaning cart as if nothing had been said. His pulse quickened. Maybe it was the draft from the storm. Maybe it was nothing. But he couldn't ignore the way the hair on the back of his neck stood up as he climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood sounding louder than it should. The hallway to room 6 felt longer than usual. The lights hummed overhead, and the patterned wallpaper seemed darker somehow, the repeating floral shapes twisting in the shadows. The door to room 6 was ajar. Evan's hand hovered over the knob. "Sir," he called softly. No response. He pushed it open. The guest wasn't there. The suitcase on the bed was open, but it wasn't packed with clothes. It was filled with postcards. Dozens of them. All from the Harborview Hotel. The dates on the backs ranged from 1963 to 1995, each one addressed to different people in different cities. But the handwriting was identical. Same loops, same heavy strokes. The same handwriting Evan had seen in last night's ledger entry. And all of them were stamped, but none had been mailed. As he lifted one, the air in the room seemed to shift, heavier, colder. The curtains rustled softly, though the nailed window behind them was still sealed tight. A floorboard creaked behind him. Part 3. The tapes. Evan shut the door to room 6 and stepped back into the hallway, his breath clouding faintly in the air. It wasn't until he reached the lobby that he realized his hands were shaking. He couldn't stop thinking about those postcards, decades worth, all in the same handwriting. And that sealed window. The Harborview kept a storage closet in the basement where old hotel records and security tapes were stacked in mismatched boxes. The place smelled of dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Evan switched on the single overhead bulb, its yellow light pooling across the clutter. The tapes weren't labeled with much more than dates, but he knew what he was looking for. November 14th, 1995. It took him 20 minutes of digging before he found the tape. The handwritten label nearly faded away. The plastic felt oddly cold, as if it had just come from a freezer. The hotel's ancient VHS player wheezed as he slid the tape in and hit play. Static for a few seconds. Then, the grainy black and white image of the Harborview's front desk. Rain hammered outside, just like last night. A man walked in. Dripping coat. Unblinking stare. Straight to the desk. Evan leaned closer. It was him. The same man who had checked in last night. Only this was 30 years ago. The tape showed him taking a brass key from the clerk, turning toward the stairs. And just as his head angled toward the camera, the picture warped, thick bands of distortion rippling across the screen until the figure was gone. Evan hit rewind, watched again. Same thing. Every time the man passed the second-floor camera, the image drowned in static. A soft knock pulled Evan's gaze to the basement door. 3 knocks. Evenly spaced. He stood, heart thudding. Hello. The knock stopped. He glanced back at the TV and froze. The guest was now on the screen again. Only this time, the footage wasn't from 1995. It was from now. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The man was standing in the lobby, directly behind the desk, directly behind Evan. On the grainy feed, the man stared into the camera as if he knew Evan was watching. Evan spun around. The lobby was empty. But a set of wet footprints now led from the middle of the lobby, up the stairs, toward room 6. Part 4. Inside the room, Evan's shoes left faint squeaks on the carpet as he followed the trail of wet footprints up the stairs. Each step felt heavier, as if the air was thickening around him. The second-floor hallway was silent. Too silent. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, but something about the sound felt wrong. It was out of sync, like the pitch kept dipping in and out. Room 6 waited at the end, the footprints leading straight to the door. It was open just enough to show a sliver of the interior, dim, shadowed, the air inside unnaturally still. Evan hesitated, his hand hovering over the brass knob. He told himself to knock, to call out, to do anything but go inside. Instead, he stepped forward. The smell hit first, not rot, not mildew, but something stale, like the inside of an old trunk that hadn't been opened in decades. The guest was sitting on the edge of the bed. His coat was gone, revealing a crisp, dark suit that looked a century out of fashion. He wasn't wet anymore. His hair was perfectly dry. He was holding something in his hands. A brass key, not the one Evan had given him. This one was older, more worn, the number 6, almost rubbed away. "I've been waiting for my checkout call," the man said without looking up. Evan's voice caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" The guest smiled faintly, like a teacher amused by a slow student. "It's been 30 years. I thought perhaps the clerk had forgotten me." The curtains shifted behind him. Evan's gaze snapped toward them. The nailed window was still shut, but the fabric rippled as if someone had brushed against it from the other side. "You need to leave," Evan said, trying to steady his voice. The man looked up then, and for the first time, Evan saw his eyes clearly, pale, cloudy, like glass marbles. "I will," the guest said softly, "as soon as you take my place." Before Evan could react, the room temperature plunged. His breath fogged in the air. The door behind him slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the narrow space. Evan spun toward it, yanking at the knob, but it wouldn't move. From the hallway, muffled by the door, he thought he heard Marisol's voice calling his name. Then another voice answered her. Evan froze. The second voice was his own. Part 5, Checkout Time. When Marisol unlocked room 6 the next morning, the first thing she noticed was the silence. Hotels always carried some trace of life. The hum of the AC, the faint creak of pipes, the whisper of the ocean wind against the glass. But here, nothing. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains still, the air stale. No suitcase, no coat, no guest, and no Evan. By the time the manager arrived, Marisol was pale and tight-lipped. They checked the desk ledger. There was no record of anyone staying in room 6 last night. Evan's handwriting from the previous evening was gone. The space where the entry should have been a clean, unmarked line. "Maybe he went home," the manager said, though his voice lacked conviction. They checked the security footage. At 2:14 a.m., Evan was seen walking down the hallway toward room 6. He opened the door, stepped inside, and never came out. The feed continued through the rest of the night. The door closed, the hallway empty. At sunrise, static swallowed the image for exactly 5 seconds. When the picture returned, the hallway looked the same. Except the brass key for room 6 was back on the rack. That night, the storm returned. Rain hammered the Harborview's battered roof. The lobby bell was silent. The new night clerk, a thin, nervous-looking man in his 20s, sat behind the desk, glancing occasionally at the flickering hallway monitors. At 11:57 p.m., the lobby door opened. A man stepped inside. He wasn't wet, though the rain poured outside. He wore a dark suit that looked like it belonged to another century. He smiled faintly and stepped up to the desk. "I'll take room 6, he said. The clerk hesitated, but reached for the ledger. "Name?" The man leaned forward slightly, his voice low, polite. "Evan." The pen in the clerk's hand trembled. He slid the brass key across the desk. The man's fingers brushed his for just a second. Cold, far too cold. "You'll find the room comfortable," Evan said. He turned and walked toward the stairs, boots leaving faint, wet prints that faded almost instantly into the carpet. The clerk watched him go, unaware that the ledger now showed room 6's last checkout date as blank. In the security feed's grainy glow, room 6's door closed, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of knocking echoed through the walls.